Hey, 12th grade, good morning. We are on Tuesday of week 5 for remote learning. We're going to be starting to build a little bit of background information today about one of the key people that are involved in this podcast. His name is Adnan Syed. So today, instead of beginning with the podcast and not having any background knowledge, I think it's best that we just take a step almost to the side so that we can gain a little bit more context before we start to jump into the actual audio of the podcast itself. So I just want to take some time to go through the overview of our targets, our learning targets for this unit, and then we'll jump into the article itself. So the unit overview, I can read through learning targets and an article overview to familiarize myself with new content. All of this is a little bit of new information in some regard. The content itself is new, and these are different learning targets than we have had since the beginning of the year. So second part of this slide just gives a little gist about the podcast itself. So during the unit, we're going to explore the criminal case of Adnan Syed versus the state of Maryland by listening to the podcast called Serial. Serial actually has 3 seasons now, but the first season that it came out with was this part on Adnan Syed. The podcast is hosted by NPR's Sarah Koenig. In her podcast, she presents detective interviews, excerpts of the trial, and interviews conducted with Syed, whom she spoke with in prison. Koenig guides the audience through story, uncovering information that apparently neither the defense nor the prosecution had been aware of at the time of the trial. Throughout the unit, we're going to be considering the effectiveness of telling a story through podcasting, right, versus telling a story through novel or through article or through play, as well as analyzing the choices that are made to structure and deliver the podcast to an audience. So it's a little bit different than what we've done thus far this year. A couple of reading targets for you in terms of our just common core connections. You guys can read through these and we will go through them as a class virtually on the remote session. But if you're just joining now on your own time, please take some time and just read through them. I'll just give you kind of like a quick rundown. So first and foremost, we're analyzing complex sets of ideas and sequence of events. We're really thinking about how the individuals and the ideas and the events themselves interact through the course of the podcast and how these ideas and characters develop. There's a lot of information in this podcast, so this is going to be a standard that we constantly come back to. We'll also be analyzing and evaluating the effectiveness that the author of the structure that authors use in their argument. So over time, we're going to see Sarah Koenig build an argument and build a stance, and we'll have to weigh in on, is her argument and her reasoning sound, and what are the things that she uses to help structure that argument, and are they effective? Different media integrated, multiple sources of information. I'll show you a little bit more of that tomorrow on the website for Serial. There are a bunch of different legal documents that we'll sift through, and I know, having had 11th grade history, you have a lot of exposure dealing with primary sources and different documents and DBQs. So this will kind of be an extension of that in some regard. And then delineating and evaluating reasoning, the application of constitutional principles, and the use of legal reasoning and the premises, purposes, and argument. Writing targets, you're going to mostly, aside from the journal prompts, you'll be writing arguments that support claims in an analysis. You'll be, of course, using valid reasoning, using relevant and sufficient evidence. Some of that evidence will come from the podcast itself. Other places that you'll pull that evidence from will be through the multiple resources and supplements that are provided in addition to the podcast itself. Speaking and listening targets, we will be having a lot of class discussions, and I anticipate that a lot of these discussions are going to get very heated because the topic is interesting. It's quick, it moves fast, and there's a lot of turns that go through this whole entire series and case. So we want to just always make sure that we're following a clear line of reasoning when we're having these conversations and building arguments, and that we're using evidence to support and really strengthen what it is that we're arguing and saying, right? Because we all have opinions, but we want to make sure that when we're talking about argument, that we're using evidence that backs that argument in a really clear way. So, what is going to be expected of you? For this unit, you'll have 1 to 2 hours of podcast listening time per week. Okay, I'm going to say that again, 1 to 2 hours of podcast listening time per week. That means every week we're going to do 1 to 2 episodes. The episodes generally range from about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. So I figure on average, if we listen to 1 episode, that would be an hour. And if we do 2 episodes in a week, that would be 2 hours. We'll start to listen to some of the episodes together. And then you'll obviously have your own time where you can go back, you can re-listen, you can rewind, all that good stuff. You'll have some journal responses that just reflect on your general opinions. You might find that your opinion changes 100 times throughout the case. I know that when I listened to this the first time, I felt one way one episode, and the next episode I completely felt a different way. So I think it'll be interesting to just track our opinions and how those opinions change and the things that cause those opinions to change. We'll also have some like detective gameplay where you and your peers will do some collaborative activities that go through the evidence and allow you to kind of become the detective in some capacity. So more on that as we go forward. At the end of the unit, you have 2 things. One is a performance task, which you will do in a small group. And the second is an independent research paper that will reflect a topic of your choice that revolves around criminal investigation, incarceration rates, trials in the United States. The research paper is more than likely going to be your final for the English 12 course. So it won't be like writing an essay about the podcast. It will be writing a research-based paper that deals with a concept or a topic that is related to the podcast. And that's way down the line, but I just want to make you aware that that's kind of what we're building towards as we go through this unit together. So sorry if that was a lot of information. I just want to, these slides are always here for you in terms of our targets, and I will be going back to these standards throughout our time together with this podcast series so that we're super hyper aware of what the target is that we're trying to reach standard wise, and just talking about the ways that we're going to be able to make sure that you meet those targets. So today's task, we're going to read through just an overview of Adnan Syed, a little bit of background information. If you can annotate while you're in the document, I'm going to make sure that everybody has their own independent copy of the document so that you can annotate yourself. And then after you read the article, there's a what I now wonder question in Google Classroom. And it's pretty straightforward. It's the question tab, and it will just ask you to reflect on anything that you're now wondering, having had a little bit more information about Adnan Syed. So if you would like to just click on this link, you can click here and that'll directly bring you to the article. It's also posted in the stream underneath the video and the slides. And then you just want to make sure, excuse me, that you click over to Google Classroom when you're done reading through and you fill in your question response for the day. So the article was taken from, I believe, the Times, and I formatted it a little bit differently so that it reads as there are those subtitles and then information that falls underneath each. So this is a quick, a pretty just general gist of things. Adnan Syed is a Muslim American who was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend Heyman Lee in 1999. His case became internationally famous by the podcast Serial in 2014. So the podcast was actually recorded in 2014. But Serial, like I said, they have more episodes now. Season 2 of Serial goes through Bill Bergdahl, who was an American soldier and he was held captive by the Taliban. So that's also a very interesting one to listen to as well. But you can play around with the app and you can do a little bit of your own reading and see if it's of interest to you. But for our purposes, we're just focusing on season 1. So that's all I have for you guys today. A lot of targets, a lot of new things. I will do my very best to make sure that you have all the supports that you need in order to reach those targets and be super successful with this. I'm really anticipating that this unit will be a lot of fun. So let me know if you need any support, additional support in the meantime. And if anything's not clear, please let me know how I can clarify for you. Okay, guys, thanks.